Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. Great to see both of you.
Good to see you, Anna.
Front pages then, as ever. Let's kick off, shall we, with the Metro. The murder of a 15-year-old girl stabbed to death in Croydon covers the Metro's front page. The headline, Machete Revenge on Bus to School. The Daily Mirror, too, with that lead, every parent's nightmare, the paper says. And the Daily Mail, the headline, stabbed to death in her uniform on the way to school. The Eye is reporting that Labour has dropped its pledge to remove charity status from some independent schools following concerns of a legal challenge to the policy. Meanwhile, The Guardian carries the story that HMRC is investigating the tax affairs of one of the Tory party's largest donors. The Telegraph leading with the continuing tensions in the Metropolitan Police as a firearms officer faces a gross misconduct hearing. The Times reports that Downing Street has authorised the Home Secretary to float the prospect of the UK leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. According to the FT, the Financial Conduct Authority is to hold a large-scale review of private market valuations. And the Daily Star reports that scientists have discovered a way to regrow teeth. That's quite good news. Anyway, scan that QR code. If true, I'm sure it will be. I drive home and find these stories are. Anyway, scan the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme and look for yourself at those front pages while you listen to our guests. So let's head to Claire and to Kevin. And Claire, why don't you pick up, actually, with the Daily Mirror? Knife crime epidemic is how they're framing it. This awful story of a 15-year-old schoolgirl who died on her way to school.
Yes, this is a desperately sad story. This is a 15-year-old girl. She was stabbed to death in her uniform, as the Mail points out. There's some suggestion there was an argument about a bunch of flowers. There was a boy involved, and the Mail's actually saying here that the person who was stabbed was stepping in to protect a friend. All we know is that there was a horrifying knife attack. This girl was meant to be going to her private school down the road near Croydon, and it was in the morning rush hour. There were, commuters everywhere, witnesses saw this happen. They were both in their school uniforms. It's a desperately sad story. Met Police have said that, this is every parent's worst nightmare. And it is, I think, the 16th violent stabbing in London this year. It clearly is an epidemic, as the Mirror says. It's clearly violence is out of hand, and it's hard to see what can be done about it if people are willing to commit these attacks during the rush hour on a normal school day morning.
Yes, we pride ourselves, don't we, that we don't have handguns in this country, unlike in the States, and yet knife crime is still an issue. And you heard the news conference, subsequent to this, the despair of the community that these sorts of attacks are happening, Kevin.
No, absolutely, because it will have... somebody's lost their life, a family is mourning, friends, neighbours, schoolmates, all will be traumatised, teachers, it ripples right through, and that's why it's leading three newspapers, the Metro, the Metro, the Mirror and the Mail. Maybe there's some we haven't seen the front of the Sun yet, possibly there, but it's, we don't know all the details because, for instance, the Metro say it's a machete, the Mail says it was a blade as big as a sword, but we all know it's been a fatal stabbing. A boy 17 has been arrested. A girl 15 is now dead, killed on her way to school. It's absolutely appalling. How do you stop it? The number of deaths isn't always constant. It comes in waves at some time. You just got to, each one will be individual, but will also be collective reasons. And it's just never give up trying to stop this happening.
Yeah, I mean, possibly a knife amnesty. We've seen them, haven't we, sometimes? But, very, very distressing for family, friends, community, just an awful incident.
Dreadful.
Let's move on to the Metro. Inside pages of it, in fact, this massive untapped area of the North Sea, given the go-ahead. Huge reaction to this, then, Claire.
Yes, so it's quite a controversial thing to do because it's the UK's largest untapped oil field. There's 350 million gallons, apparently, of oil in there. And what's really, really interesting about it is that it's Rishi Sunak saying, we want to make sure this country has an independent energy supply, but it's driven climate change campaigners mad because they're like, we shouldn't be digging for fossil fuels at a time when, we're fighting to meet net zero targets. But Rishi Sunak's already started with this because he's ditched a lot of green pledges that had been, Tory pledges before this. So it's really, really interesting. They think they're going to start drilling in a couple of years and that it could provide about 8% of the UK's energy. But what's really interesting about it is that it will be run by a company that's based in Norway, and the oil will be sold on the mass market.
But that's how the system works, isn't it?
Yes.
It will go to energy security, but across Northwest Europe. That's how you have to think about it.
So you actually don't get the oil. It's equivalent. I mean, the way they've written
it goes to the market.
It's equivalent to 8%, but it doesn't. It's not your 8%. You might have zero benefit from it, other than the government could get taxes on the output. Although they're going to get such big tax breaks, they might end up getting £3 or £4 billion to develop the field, and it benefits Britain very little at all. But Labour's going along with it. Keir Starmer has said he'll honour all licences. Now, it's very interesting because if he said, if we're in power, we win the next election year's time, we won't honour this licence, I suspect it wouldn't go ahead. But he doesn't want to do that because he feels he'd be on the wrong side of the argument. You'd get a lot of hassle from trade unions.
Exactly.
Unite and the GMB, but both important to Labour financially and organisationally. You could be on the wrong side of parts of public opinion, but the North Sea is almost pumped out. It's way past its
So the costs
peak now.
of extraction go up, and therefore the energy requirements of extraction go up. And how does this, compare, when you look at what's happening, for example, in sea ice in Antarctica? Does Rishi Sunak not care about climate change? He says he does, but he's pushed it all down the line. What does it mean electorally? What's your best bet?
Well, you can see that this is a clear strategy in the run-up to the next election.
Do you genuinely think that's what it is?
I
or
think
is it
so,
that Rishi
yes.
Sunak doesn't have, such strong feelings about it that Boris Johnson did?
I think Rishi Sunak is taking... His argument is that we will meet net zero at 2050, but we have to take a different route because it's not realistic to get people to replace their gas boilers with heat pumps at a cost of £5,000, £10,000, £15,000, which is what they do cost at the moment. It's not realistic to say to people, you have to buy a new car and, you're not going to be able to buy a petrol or diesel car in 5 years, when the EU is 5 years later than that. His view is that you have to do these things practically. And there is a bit of a backlash across Europe because loads of other countries have had a backlash from their populations, and there's a rise of kind of anti-climate parties who don't want any of these changes to happen. So Rishi Sunak's argument is that the way to preserve net zero is to make sure this stuff is done properly.
The way to preserve it is to use more fossil fuels. But it's interesting. Gordon Brown saying to Sky, look, I'd rather we had it from the North, this fuel from the North Sea rather than Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's quite...
He's thinking about jobs in Scotland
as well. It's a clever argument, but of course it is just leaving us more dependent on these fossil fuels for longer. That's what it really does.
OK, let's go to something that the Eye's been covering all week, which is Labour's policy on private schools, about VAT on fees and on their charitable status. Kevin, why don't you do this one for us? It looks like one part has been rowed back on.
Yeah, the charitable status. I thought they dropped this some time ago. And the only reason is I realised Keir Starmer, the leader, and Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, had just stopped talking about removing charitable status for months. I just assumed there must have been an announcement at some point and I'd missed it, but it seems they haven't. They've just sort of tried to tiptoe away from it. So the money, 1.7 billion, will go on fees, 20%. Private schools say loads will close, their lobby group, but then the Institute of Fiscal Studies came out with a report saying, well, actually, that wouldn't be the case at all. But Labour's going to plan to use the money to employ an extra 6,500 teachers. Sounds a lot, really, but given there's more than 20,000 state schools, that's kind of, a day and a half new teacher for each if you spread them around. But Labour have very few tax pledges, very, very few. I think non-dom
and it doesn't raise a
private
loss,
schools.
does it? That's the point.
But I think they're sending out a powerful signal. There's only 7% of kids in private schools, 93% in state schools. And it does seem ridiculous that Eton is kind of treated in such a way. I mean, it's still going to be allowed to be a charity, but you don't pay VAT on school fees. You somehow get a 20% tax break. I mean, come on, it's not good use of public money.
Yeah, I mean, what's the positioning for your paper on this one, for example?
Well, I think, this is clearly what seems to have happened, and I hear Kevin, but none of it, there wasn't an announcement.
No.
None of us knew that they decided to drop this charitable status thing. In fact, today they were briefing that, you know, we're not going to treat schools, these private schools, as charities. That's been our position for ages. And it took us seconds to find, you know, quotes from Keir Starmer and Bridget Phillipson saying that, you know, they were planning this. So it clearly is a position change. They've decided finally that they're actually going to...
Because of legal challenge, they suggested, yeah? They get mad in the courts and all that.
Well, that sounds convenient to me. It sounds more like they're going a bit soft on these private schools. So when they're accused of class war, they can just say, we got a financial case here because we're going to employ the 6,500 teachers, but we're not going to go full out for you. If they say they made an announcement, they can just show us where it was.
Yeah.
It's easy. I mean, look, I'm old enough
to... for the overnight.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember where Keir Starmer supported renationalising water. Going back into the European Union. I mean, defending free movement.
Yeah. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph, shall we? Only half of trainee GPs go into the NHS full-time, which is, I mean, this long suggestion about the fact they're going elsewhere, Claire.
Yeah, this story is actually quite interesting. It's based on figures from the Nuffield Trust, which show that while 2,837 medical graduates start off their training, only half of those become full-time GPs who join the health service. It's not quite clear where they go or for what reason.
Do they continue their training?
Well, this is it. It seems to suggest that they then don't go to fulfil these GP training posts. It's there's, you know, a suggestion that some go overseas and maybe, you know, they carry on their training there, but it's not really clear what they mean. But I think there is clearly a crisis in the NHS. There's a lack of GPs or a lack of certain types of doctors. There's a lack of basically everyone. So there is a huge problem there, and I think they've started talking about expanding the number of places for doctors and nurses to train in Britain.
Well, I thought they kept the cap, actually. The cap got loosened during COVID, but the cap's been kept.
Yeah, but if you're getting all these people training, but they're leaving, and they'll have run up huge student debts, but for whatever reason they're quitting. It's like running a bath with the plug out. So you're putting all these people in, but then they're just draining away. And you're never really going to improve the NHS without extra GPs and other medical staff and beds. But the Health Foundation has quoted, which is a think tank quoted in the Telegraph here, saying 4,200 GPs short in England. If you haven't got those GPs who are the gateway into the NHS, you're going to have more and more people going to A&E, which is a huge problem then at A&E.
Or not getting treated and then waiting too long to be seen. It's the classic issue we've seen.
It is. GPs are absolutely crucial, but I think the pressure's on them. They don't feel particularly valued and they're overburdened, not appreciated. If they're quitting where we are, we're stuffed, basically.
There is a suggestion
Sorry,
a lot of them are
technical term, I know.
It says we're short of everything and you say we're stuffed, isn't it?
Yeah, happy days. Yeah.
Very, very quickly, yes? You're going to say there's a suggestion?
There's a suggestion that a lot of them going into private companies like Bupa and
the rise of the private GP, we've seen it, haven't we? Yeah. Lots more still to come, including 2 GB News presenters are suspended after one doesn't stop the other from going on a misogynist rant. We will discuss that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Kev Maguire and Claire Ellicott. Welcome back to both of you. So let's get to GB News. It is on page 4 of the Metro. GB News suspends the duo over actor Fox's sexist rant about journalist Kevin.
Yes, I think this was always going to happen on this channel because it's just running out of control and people are being encouraged to be ever more outrageous in the name of free speech when it's hate speech. And this, of course, is Lawrence Fox, who heads the Reclaim Party, a very small, I suppose it's anti-woke, isn't it? That's what drives it party. Talking about Ava Evans, a reporter in the most derogatory terms, possibly. I mean, in short, saying no one would ever sleep with her, which is absolutely crazy and a vile thing to say. And Dan Wootton, the presenter, didn't check him, didn't pull him up. Look, we have debates here, and I'll say minor things, and you'll jump in the interest of fairness or say, hang on, they're not here to answer. I mean, if Lawrence Fox had somehow been sitting here and had said that, you'd have been straight in and tore him apart, as any presenter worth his or her salt would. But Dan didn't. And then Fox gets suspended and he's taken Wootton down. And it's revolutions devour their children. The culture warriors are now fighting each other because Fox is trying to take Wootton down by showing he was publicly contrite, Wootton, but then he had been sending emojis kind of approving of what had happened to Fox.
Yes, Lawrence Fox revealed all after the event, did they not, that they'd had a laugh about it. Anyway, even though Dan Wootton had apologised.
It was a big problem for GB News, though, because not only Ofcom...
Well, why is it, though?
Well, not because of... They've got reputational damage, I think, but they'll be terrified now about Ofcom because it's a clear breach. But also, Paul Marshall, one of the owners, an incredibly wealthy city slicker, who puts a lot of money into GB News, is all thought to be wanting to buy the Telegraph. Now, you will have to pass certain tests to buy the Telegraph. I can't imagine, if you're a big investor, you want to be associated with a channel that is peddling this filth.
Well, what about all those Tory MPs who currently also present for it, not, including the deputy chair of the party as well? Would they have been a quiet phone call too, do you think, to the bosses there or not?
Well, what's interesting about GB News is it's quite a new startup. They do have a lot of very good journalists on the channel, and they have... they also have a lot of members of the Tory party who must be, wondering at this moment in time whether they continue. But...
I mean, if there's a guilty by association thing happening, then, some people might... There was a lot of GB presenters who, turned on what happened last night, to be fair, to distance themselves.
Yeah, and they've been on Twitter today saying, that they decry these comments. And it was particularly vile listening to it because, Ava Evans just made a point about how, she thought that having a minister for men wouldn't be a great idea. And Lawrence Fox didn't...
In the context of mental health care, wasn't it? Yeah.
And Lawrence Fox then went on to Dan Wootton's show and didn't attack her on that point. He then started this kind of vile rant about how nobody wanted to sleep with her. And Dan Wootton laughed along. So the whole thing it was very hard to watch. And I think, it's really affected the journalists at the centre of it. It's hard for GB News to defend it, but they have suspended both of the presenters, and Ofcom are now investigating. So I suspect, there will be a conclusion to all of this, and maybe GB News will be able to survive because they, don't continue with the show.
I'm only hiring you because we've got the teeth.
Yeah, of course.
I've chosen the teeth. Yeah. The teeth are on it. Anyway, a Japanese scientist has found a way to grow new teeth. Hopefully not ones quite like that, but anyway...
Isn't that Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager?
God.
I think... So you've just insulted...
I didn't even recognise him.
Would you like to apologise to all those...
I'm really sorry that I didn't recognise you with all the graphic words all over the picture.
Pretty certain that's him. But I remember he just turned up with a new pair of gnashers, or he seemed to have...
Did you go to Japan for them?
I don't know. But if you grow new teeth, I mean, you'd still have to have them fixed in, wouldn't you? So it'd just be like falsies.
Like dentures, maybe.
Yeah. I can't back you now.
I've got to get to Storm Magnus. Kevin, Claire, thank you very much indeed. See you.